It just dawned on me last night while I was laying in bed what the U.S. is trying to pull. The story about wanting new elections really doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Because, first of all, they just had elections, and Maduro won. The U.S. said they weren't free and fair, which is odd. But now with all of the talk about the coup and the sanctions, that actually plays right into Maduro's hand in a new election. Because they're not going to want some U.S. puppet. So what is the U.S. thinking it's going to pull off? Well, I just figured it out. And what it has to do with is this. Now, I know this looks confusing. This is something from the 90s in America. Most of the country in 1992 wanted a continuation of the Reagan-Bush policy. And the voting proved that, because 37.5% wanted Bush, 18.9% wanted somebody to the right of George Bush, an ultra-conservative, meaning 57% of the people were voting for a conservative, one way or the other, and only 43% wanted Bill Clinton. But he ended up being president because how we do elections, unlike how they do them in Brazil and Colombia, is we just let everybody run, and whoever gets the most as a percentage, that's who the winner is. See, in Brazil and Colombia, what they do is they have an initial election, and then they narrow it down to the top two, and then they let them run. So it's mob rule in Brazil, mob rule in Colombia. But it's not mob rule in Venezuela. See, a lot of people don't remember this. 2012, right before Chavez passed away, he absolutely smoked the AshkeNAZI Jew Radonski. He was an incredibly popular president. What did he represent? He represented Chavismo. He represented the left. He beat this guy like a drum, 55 to 44, with 80.5% turnout. And he beat everybody 3 times prior to that as well, going all the way back to 99. This is what the U.S. hated. They never really referred to Hugo Chavez as a socialist dictator. They referred to him as the president because they couldn't knock down the elections, because they weren't close. This is the problem a lot of people in America who are pro-random guy named Juan don't get. Most of Venezuela is Chavista. They've had some problems. You see, the U.S. had to introduce a whole bunch of financial hiccup. Because at that time, 2012, 2013, down here in the lower right, there wasn't. And that's why Chavez was popular. And that's also why Maduro beat Radonski. Now, he didn't beat him nearly as badly because there were some problems beginning to come out, and he got a bounce from Chavez endorsing him. But he won, and this is the most important thing I need my audience to hear. He won in a head-to-head election where the choices were Chavismo or anything else. And anything else was only represented by one other choice. So anybody who wasn't for Chavismo only had one choice. That changed in the last election. And this is what the Democratic Unity Roundtable knew. That's why they didn't run. That's why they pulled out, they took their ball and went home like a bunch of spoiled sports. Because they realized they were going to be one of 4 other ideas on the table. And unless they had everybody else who wasn't a Chavista on their side, they stood no chance. That's how popular Chavismo is in Venezuela. That's why they threw a temper tantrum about Henri Falcón running and Javier Buterchi running and Reinaldo Quijada running. Because they thought they were entitled to all of those votes. See, they don't want to win in an arena of ideas. They want to win in an arena of men. They don't want to try to run against Chavismo. They want to run against a guy. That's why they had to introduce all of this pain over here. Because they knew that they were going to blame the government. They, meaning the people of Venezuela. Just like we do here. Every time there's a problem, we blame whoever the president is at the time. That's why they want new elections. They want new elections now because they think with the combination of the financial pain and only having one guy run, that they can beat Maduro. Not Chavismo, they can beat Maduro. Because they had no chance of beating Chavez. And they're starting to step up the game now. Because the Venezuelans know this. There still is a president in Venezuela. His name is Nicolas Maduro. He is not a socialist dictator. Is there certain elements of socialism in that country? Yes, but there's also quite a few elements of capitalism in that country. They buy and sell things for profit, believe it or not. But they have someone in their country who is acting like a seditionist, treasonous asshole, pretending he's president. And if that were to happen in this country, you can guarantee that person would be arrested. If someone decided to stand up and say, I'm president, and start dealing with other governments and taking money from other governments, you bet they'd be arrested. This is what the U.S. is trying to avoid. They don't want a whole bunch of ideas on the table. That's why they suppress the Green Party here. That's why they suppress the Libertarian Party here, because they want mob rule. They want idea A and idea B, because they control both idea A and B in this country. And that's exactly what they want for Venezuela. When there's multiple ideas on the table, Chavismo always wins because it's the largest group of people there. I brought up this graphic because it shows how Brazil and Colombia does it for them. See, they pretend to have a whole big arena of ideas. In the beginning, they have 4 or 5 or 6 people run, but then they just take the top 2 and then they do a whole new election again, which is basically just the same thing. Same thing in Colombia. They just make sure that it isn't a discussion of ideas anymore. It's a discussion of men. And that's why they had to jail Lula da Silva. Because in every single poll, no matter what, he won running away in Brazil. That's why they had to jail him. Bolsonaro wasn't even on the radar when da Silva was free. He wasn't even in the... It was a discussion of how many different leftist candidates there were and which leftist candidate was going to win. But they made a mistake because they allowed da Silva to be in prison, and then they had a guy, Bolsonaro, who represented one idea. And then he ran against 3 or 4 other people, all representing the same idea. And so all those votes got split up. And that's why Bolsonaro's president. That's why Duque's president. This is the game they're trying to play. They only want one guy to run against one other guy in Venezuela. This used to not work. Radonski got thumped. And he represents the Democratic Unity Roundtable. In an arena of ideas, with the U.S. not stealing all of Venezuela's money, stealing Citgo, stealing their gold, holding all of their funds, Chavismo wins running away. Now, whether Americans agree with that or not is really not our business. It really isn't. And this should show you clearly the game the U.S. is playing. They're not trying to establish free and fair elections. They're trying to establish elections under a certain set of circumstances where they think they can manipulate the people of Venezuela into voting a certain way simply based on a lack of resources. And it was a very, very close race last time, when the U.S. introduced all that hiccup, all that poverty, by cratering the price of oil, by seizing billions and billions of dollars. And the U.S. even is admitting it now. They're seizing all of Citgo's assets. They're sanctioning PDVSA. The Bank of England is keeping their gold. And people are starting to wake up. And they're like, well, wait a minute. If Venezuela had all this money, socialism didn't destroy their economy. The U.S. theft did. And that's why the people voted so close for Radonski against Maduro. You give the money that Venezuela has earned to them, money they're entitled to that nobody is making any kind of allegation was stolen other than by the U.S., and you allow them to buy food, you allow them to buy parts for their rigs, you allow them to buy medical supplies on the open market like everyone else, then have an election. Then see what happens. This is what the U.S. can't have. The U.S. can't have this. They can't have the arena of different ideas rear its ugly head in Venezuela, because that shoots down all of their hopes of tyranny. So understand, this is really the game. This is why the U.S. thinks it can win what it calls a free and fair election. When the Democratic Unity Roundtable and their candidates had the ability to run last summer and chose to not participate. They chose to not participate, not because they thought it wasn't free and fair, but because there were other people running and the vote against was going to get split. Just like what happened in this country back in '92. Even if you make the allegation that Chavismo doesn't represent at least 50% of the people, that's not how it works in a republic. And it is a Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And I don't know what the end game is, how the U.S. thinks it's possibly going to rule that country if they were somehow to install a random guy named Juan, when you have millions and millions and millions of devout Chavistas that ain't going to play. It's going to be a nightmare. You mark my words. This is the real story from Venezuela. They couldn't win in free and fair elections, so they had to destroy their economy and then muck with who the people were and how the elections took place. I've called this the greatest geopolitical miscalculation in the history of the United States. I stand by that. I absolutely stand by that. The U.S. has totally blown it here. And now that the world is seeing the coup, they are seeing the theft on behalf of Great Britain and the United States of the resources of the people of Venezuela. It is going to backfire badly. And we'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe.